this is one of our regular webinars, online events showcasing some of the outcomes and findings from Agroecology-TRANSECT, which Walter is about to tell you a lot more about in a moment. And we try and have these every couple of months to present findings and stimulate discussion. We've got a really interesting and engaging panel lined up for you. So yeah, once again, please keep your microphones and cameras off, ideally. And if you've got any questions or you want to ask the panel anything at all, just pop it in the chat and we'll come to questions later. So I will pass over to Walter Rossing to introduce himself, and he's going to talk a little bit about the Agroecology-TRANSECT project itself before launching into the kind of main part of our session this morning. Walter, we can see your screen. It's not in presenter mode yet, but I imagine it's about to be. And over to you. Thank you.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tim. Good morning, everyone. Yes, very nice to see so many people at this webinar, Driving Agroecological Change Through Transdisciplinary Research. We are drawing on the experiences of Agroecology-TRANSECT, Horizon Europe project that I will introduce first, and then later on move into my own content-related presentation, to then hand over to the next speaker and speakers. So Agroecology-TRANSECT is a 4-year project, and here you see the call, where TRANSECT is an acronym that stands for Transdisciplinary Approaches for Systemic, Economic, Ecological and Climate Change Transitions. The coordinator is Bertrand Dumont of INRAE, and my own role until recently, because I just recently retired, but I'm not ready to give up on this great project yet, has been to be part of the consortium that constructed the project, so the thinking that went into it, and leading the work package with the innovation hubs. Innovation hubs, what are they? So let's turn to Agroecology-TRANSECT in a nutshell then. The aim of the project is to contribute to unfolding the full potential of agroecology for European agriculture. We focus on 3 thematic domains: climate change adaptation and mitigation, biodiversity conservation in farm ecosystems, and farm socio-economic resilience. So it's very much a farm level enterprise. And the whole project is basically built around 11 innovation hubs, networks that have been working on agroecological transformation for at least 4 years. We aim to contribute to this aim of unfolding agroecology by generating what we call agroecological knowledge. Here, very briefly, knowledge that specifically supports the stakeholder decision-making and subsequent actions. But Stephen Leitheiser in the next presentation will go into that in much more detail. Then some numbers. We're 19 partners from 12 countries, 8 million euros over 4 years. We have a very nice balance of academic partners with a balance in disciplines, agronomic and ecological versus political and social science, and that allows for very interesting social learning. We have 9 non-profit organizations and small and medium enterprises, and we have rather good balances of numbers of men and women at all levels, including young researchers. So those innovation hubs, agroecological networks that have been working on their agroecological transformation for more than 4 years, 3 grassland-based systems, here represented in green on the map, 2 integrated crop livestock systems in southern Spain and in Guadeloupe, French West Indies, 4 systems with crops, including organic and conservation agriculture in yellow, and then 2 individual cases where one is a knowledge hub for organic farmers delivering vegetable boxes in Slovenia, and the other is a Hungarian network of where cover crops in vineyards and orchards are organized. We develop this actionable knowledge in order to support anchoring of agroecology as a concept. And we draw on the multi-level perspective, which very briefly outlines that there is a mainstream set of food systems. There can be different food systems, but still there is a mainstream. And the mainstream currently is the corporate industrial food system. There can also be niche innovations, alternative food system, agroecological food systems, food co-ops, CSAs, what have you. And they are influencing the regime to a greater or lesser extent. And then we have at the top level here, the socio-technical landscape, which is a public opinion, political agendas, insights into climate change and other global changes. And usually they operate at a low pace. Now, current dynamics are tremendous in the world. But overall, looking back, this socio-technical landscape is rather slow in changing. And the socio-technical regime is also quite solid. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to get up in the morning and know what to expect. However, these niches, they create alternatives. Like in evolution, they create seeds of change. And our innovation hubs are positioned in different places in relation to the regime. Some are inside the regime, niche inside the regime. Some are developing alternatives to the regime, and others are more emergent. Whatever, in Agroecology-TRANSECT, we work at anchoring, meaning how to create supporting conditions locally for these initiatives. And we do so by identifying barriers and levers to transition to agroecology in the innovation hubs. And I invite you to go to our website and have a look at the very nice contributions of, and now my screen disappears.
Make sure I change your name. Sorry about this. Clearly we had some issues and we are trying to address them.
Okay, good. Thanks, Carlo. So, as I was saying, we are working around the core of 11 innovation hubs, and together with them, we're trying to identify barriers and levers to help them to access to their mission and vision of agroecology. And I invite you, as I just said just before the intermission, to visit our website and hear the stories from the innovation hubs in the Netherlands, Spain, and Slovenia. What we are also doing in the project is to look at the agroecological principles that have internationally been defined, and there are different ones, and I'll get to that in a minute. Here are the 13 principles of the high-level panel of experts of the United Nations, and we have looked at our innovation hubs from the perspective of these 13 principles, and we notice that the innovation hubs have a highly different importance attached to each of those principles, which does make sense for their strive towards agroecology, which indeed calls for adaptation to local needs of farmers and to local communities. And of all of this, there is material available on the website or by individuals in the project. Then the innovation hubs have a central place, but we also wanted to cast the net broader to what we call DINAIs, Dynamic Agroecological Initiatives. And we have asked for a response and found at the moment 89 of these DNIs across Europe that we also interview and try and find patterns in what they find in terms of success factors and barriers. And a similar story holds for the narratives. So there are these international organizations, FAO, UN, but there are also the narratives of 115 social movements around Europe that that have a role to play in how people on the ground working, boots on the ground in agroecology. And are there differences between these perspectives, and what does that mean for agroecology in Europe? And then the final slide introducing the project brings us closer to what we are going to deal with in this webinar. Not only are we interested in what we learn, but we are also interested in how we learn. So you can say how we organize ourselves as a project to contribute to meaningful transformation towards agroecology. And we do that by drawing on the description of action, the DOA, which is an acronym that is used a lot in European projects because it is the contract basically between the project and the European Commission. And inside that description of action, there is an explicit or implicit theory of change. So how do we think as a project to arrive at the goals that we have? And that results then in action plans, and that we take to be very serious by asking reflexive questions to ourselves as part of the project. So we develop learning histories, and I'll come back to that tool of learning history in a minute in my own presentation. So we stimulate reflexivity not only in the innovation hubs, but also in the work package and at the project management level. So then a little bit about the context and aim of this webinar. The European Commission has for many, many years invested in research with impact on society. This is what they want, and this is how they think that research can help Europe and probably the world in general. And they call this, or have called this, multi-actor approaches. And more than 45% of the research and innovation call, so a lot of money, goes to these multi-actor approaches. They've created a structure called the EU CAP network that collects these multi-actor approach experiences, and many of the mission-oriented calls. There is a soil mission, there's also agroecology, have adopted this multi-actor approach, recently replaced by the term living labs. Now, these MAAs and living labs basically refer to transdisciplinary research approaches, in which not only research disciplines are connected, so multidisciplinary research, but also these are connected to society actors. And that transdisciplinarity is uncomfortable for many involved, for the scientists, because they aim for, at least traditionally, for generic knowledge. And these agroecological and transdisciplinary approaches aim for local knowledge. So how to marry these two aims. For the actors in society, which often have problems that they would like to see solved, quick fixes, versus this longer term involvement with other actors, including the scientists, where science is notoriously slow, useful, but slow. And then finally also for the donors who like to firm up everything in contracts and make sure that it's legally solid, whereas we will see that contractual flexibility is a crucial element. And studies of past experiences of these multi-actor approaches show that we are often locked in as scientists, but also as other actors, in these old expectations and old ways of working. So there is, with the advent of this new, let's say, generation of transdisciplinarity in projects with living labs, there's a need for reflection on how to organize, how to govern transdisciplinarity, in this case for agroecology. So the aim of this webinar is therefore to share and discuss transdisciplinarity for agroecology by drawing on the Agroecology-TRANSECT project. And the program we constructed for this is a presentation on the umbrella that we use for transdisciplinary project governance called co-innovation. And I'll talk a little bit about that, how we do it in the project and how it came about. Then pass over to Dr. Stephen Leitheiser, who will focus on the project and its achievements thus far, so 3 years into the project, 2.5 years, and to discuss the production of actionable knowledge and the contribution to transformative change. And then we'll have reactions. One from Dr. Vyara Stefanova, who works with the NGO STEP in Bulgaria and is co-lead of the Bulgarian Innovation Hub. And the other from Dr. Bertrand Dumont from INRAE in France, who's not only the project coordinator, but also strongly involved as a member of the mainland France Innovation Hub called Coccinelle. And facilitation is in the good hands of Tim and Balint. So over to the presentation that I prepared for this webinar, which I would like to give credit to Professor Santiago Dogliotti of the University of the Republic in Uruguay as well, because part of this is really taken from a presentation that we recently gave a keynote at Farming Systems Design Conference in Paris. But also I've been working with him for over more than 20 years on this co-innovation notion. So what to organize, what to expect? First of all, I'll go into how we developed co-innovation in Agroecology-TRANSECT during the project construction, so previous to getting the money, and then later on during project implementation. And then take a step into the history of co-innovation and talk about co-innovation in the Uruguayan projects that have heavily inspired co-innovation as we are using it in our European projects. So Agroecology-TRANSECT, during the building of the project, there was a core group, a bunch of people who knew each other, mostly researchers. We knew each other from previous projects, and we analyzed the key elements in the call text. What does the European Commission want? What will they give money for? And what kind of expertise do we need to mobilize? What kind of expertise do we already have? That's quite a usual step. The next step was a little bit less usual in that we agreed on 4 guiding principles, and I'll come back to those in the next slide. Then we made a long list of agroecological initiatives because the initiatives were part of the guiding principles to potentially engage with, drawing on our own networks, asking other people. The result was 21 initiatives on the long list. And then we connected with them, doing exchanges, interviews in 1 to 4 rounds of online meetings with a key person from those networks, or what you could call a facilitator. We explained the project ideas, the shape that the project could take given the call. We tried to understand the initiative's history and its mission in relation to agroecology, and we tried to find out together what relevance the project could be for the initiative. And in the end, we invited 11 initiatives to participate based on criteria such as they had proven that they had a certain stability, were active in their transformation at least for 4 years, were self-supporting thus far, were open to the approach, which was a bit adventurous in the project, and were willing to agree that the project would work through a facilitator or a facilitator team in each of the innovation hubs, and that facilitator team would liaise with the network. So then about these guiding ideas, 4 of them. First idea was that a project, we thought about, well, what is a project for innovation hubs, for agroecological initiatives? Well, let's face it, a project is a temporary travel companion to innovators. The initiative, so the Innovation Hub, has a history, has a future after the project, and then somewhere there is some joint time. That the project engages with the Innovation Hub. So that means that the project should think in the long term, when thinking together with the Innovation Hubs, act in the short term, and from the start of the project create a legacy. So what are we going to leave behind, and is this of relevance to the innovators? Based on locally salient knowledge. So the role of generic knowledge should also be not so much just knowledge for curiosity, but to enhance local capacities. And that we wanted to use for anchoring the agroecological initiatives. And I've already discussed this slide, which was in fact our guiding idea 2. Yeah, so this anchoring of the innovation hubs as niche innovations in or close to the regime. Then the third guiding idea was actionable knowledge, context-specific knowledge that assists actors in their decision-making to be better positioned to achieve goals. And here we take the letter of Gliesman, which is nicely reshaped by Pablo Titonel in using eco-efficiency, input substitution, and systems redesign as what you could see as steps, not necessarily linear steps, from current food systems or farm systems to agroecological, agro-eco diversified systems that require not only technological innovation, that agronomists and ecologists are very often involved in, but also requires institutional innovation with new partners, new value chains, new rules and regulations, and very importantly, also new narratives, new stories. What do we think is feasible? And once we think that really strongly, the tipping point may be there and change may happen. And then the final 4th idea was, well, let's adopt co-innovation as a way to learn our way to agroecology. And co-innovation then concerns 3 different dimensions. One is we look at the world as consisting of complex adaptive systems. So there are systems at different levels. We could see ourselves, our person, as a system. We could see our immediate surroundings in which we work as a system. There is the agricultural innovation system at a higher level. But we can also talk about farms, regions, landscapes as systems. And all of these systems interact, giving feedbacks and feed forwards. And we know from system dynamics that this results in emergent behavior, which is inherently unpredictable and gives rise to the need for adaptive management. Then the second dimension is social learning. Social learning concerns learning together, but very much as part of that also learning about the perception of others. Which results in needs identification. If I understand better what your aim is, I can better understand what you need, and which takes place in networks of actors. And the overlap between these 2 spheres really determines how we see the world, the framing of the world. And I think Stephen will come back to that in the next presentation, because as part of our work in the project, this framing, at least for some, has changed. And the final component is monitoring and evaluation during the project and also after the project for accountability, so that the donors are happy. But as part of this co-innovation, very much also for learning, so that we can think about, are we doing the right things? So reflexivity connected to social learning. and anticipating the unexpected because of this adaptive management need of complex adaptive systems. And that we call co-innovation. Now, that was before the project. Then now we're inside the project and we have 4 years with a kickoff meeting, annual meetings 1, 2, 3, 4. And then with the innovation hubs, we organized co-innovation workshops. So separate places where during 2 or 3 days we got together as part of the project with the innovation hubs, different parts of the project. And first of all, we spent time to explore and then time to develop the activities. So co-innovation workshop 1, for instance, included looking back on the history of the innovation hubs. So what happened during their history? What was the resulting vision and mission? What were core problems and what were the root causes of these problems? So these root causes then give rise to, well, what are we going to work on? Causal analysis, network analysis. Who do we work with? Can we expand, or are we working with the right people or right organizations? What are indicators for success? This project offered to support quantification of effects of agroecology, but what indicators? There's always a huge confusion about indicators. And the innovation hubs being together, they allowed also for peer-to-peer learning, amongst others, through an innovation hub visit. And then at the end of such a co-innovation workshop, the innovation hub would take an action plan as a preliminary discussion plan for validation with their actors back home. Now, the next co-innovation workshops basically developed more links to the project. In all cases, we drew on what we call learning histories. So we ask in a structured fashion the innovation hubs to look back on the recent past, or for the very first meeting, on the far past since their inception, and think about what were most significant events over the course of the lifetime of the initiative or over the course of the past year. And then describe why they consider this to be a most significant event and classify these events in terms of their effects. And this then also provides data for cross-analysis, so more analytical approaches offered by the project. And as part of the co-innovation workshops, as part of the social learning, we also inserted insights from science, from political agroecology, from people who know a lot about indicator measurements, multi-criteria analysis, to arrive together at consensus about how to take next steps through action plans. So basically what we did is we developed learning cycles with the innovation hubs. The co-innovation workshop resulting in an action plan. We follow through with reflection calls, online meetings to stimulate reflection in the innovation hubs by providing our perspectives. And Stephen has been a monitor, taking the role of, well, the fly on the wall and giving feedbacks from those observations. Meeting with the entire project at the annual meeting, and then check-in calls again to result in the next co-innovation workshop. And we not only, let's say, subjected the innovation hubs to this learning cycle, but we also did so at the project level, where work packages, WPs, provided learning histories that explicitized what was important and why it was important, so that the executive committee, the governance organism within the project, could design action plans for the year to come. Now, this co-innovation approach, as we implement it here, has its history and has quite some history in Uruguay, you see here on the right, before it came to Europe. Some 4 projects that I would like to highlight that brought about co-innovation as we have used it in Europe, although with local contextual changes. So the development of co-innovation can be seen as the development of a socio-technical niche in itself. So it's a kind of innovation niche that has progressed in Uruguay to a very strong extent, starting from vegetable systems, then moving to livestock systems, starting in research institutions, then being taken over by government institutions and farmer organizations. And you see that there have been a large succession of projects until where we are now in Uruguay in project number 6, completely taken over by the ministry, aiming at 1,000 farms, 100 advisors that are to be approached and trained. And you see that the duration of those projects was not very different from what we are used to in Europe, and that the number of farms are working always at the individual farm level rather than the innovation hub level was initially quite small and then increased until the last research project that dealt with 60 farms. And we can distinguish different phases, and I'll just briefly go into those phases. The first phase was the development of the co-innovation idea. That was done in conjunction with improvement of sustainability at farm level in vegetable farms in southern Uruguay. Here is in the north is Brazil, in the west and south is Argentina. That's Uruguay. And you see a number of farmers and almost as many researchers as farmers in those projects. Competitive funding, national, international, and the research institution in the lead, and methods and tools very much like I showed for the co-innovation workshops. Maybe the difference here is the PIPA, the Participatory Impact Pathway Analysis Reflection Workshop format that we adjusted in Europe, but also problem trees, also monthly monitoring meetings, open field days, and most significant change stories. Different from what we are doing in Agroecology-TRANSECT was that the project focused on individual farms. So they took a year to characterize vegetable farms, leading to a diagnosis of strong points and points to be improved. Agreement with the farm family on redesign, and then monitoring and implementation during 2 years. And learning outcomes were substantial farm system level changes, improvements in many indicator domains for the farm family, but also about project design and management related to co-innovation and insights on the role of extension agents. Then the second phase, in the second phase, they took the approach from vegetables to livestock systems, beef and sheep systems. And I won't go into many details. You see that the participating farmer researcher ratio remains the same. Some methods and tools were reused, the vague bits here, and new ones were added. The cycle was the same, and the learning outcomes particularly involved while going beyond the farm level, also including new network actors, regional institutional actors in the co-innovation process to further support socially this idea of how to work between research and society. And then phase 3 was really larger numbers of farms and the initiative change from the research institute to the government. Projects were on climate change, and in fact all of these themes relate to agroecology, sometimes explicitly agroecology, sometimes related more to sustainability aspects. And you see here also that the farmer to researcher ratio changed considerably, with fewer researchers being able to support many more on farm level changes. Again, a couple of additional methods and tools, but basically building on what was done before. Now 3 cycles of monitoring and evaluation. And the learning outcomes basically were that these ecological intensification, EI, strategies and technologies are really work. They can be adopted by farmers within 3 years. They can lead to tremendous increases in capacitation of the farmers and in material outcomes. The advisory service needs to adjust considerably, and we also now know better how to govern these multi-hectare innovation processes. Now, just a couple of ideas, because this is all a little bit intangible, but for the farmers, family income in the last project, same in the previous project, family income increased, costs decreased. You can say all indicators, all socio-economic indicators went for more green domains, despite the farms experiencing the worst drought on record on record in 2023. You also see that greenhouse gas emissions went down per hectare and per kilogram meat produced. Herbage height increased, which has very positive effects on biodiversity in general, and plant diversity increased. So the application of these ecological intensification practices was sustained, and 70% of participant farmers decided to continue with this systemic view on their farms. Now, summarizing then this is that you see actionable knowledge accumulation over the various projects. You see decreasing influence by the researchers. You see that you needed all these projects, and you see that the network size and complexity increased over time. I'll just skip this slide because of our intermission. We're running a bit short on time, and move to concluding remarks. So you see that evaluating this co-innovation requires multiple projects and cross-case analyses. And I don't think we're there yet with the full analysis for Europe. So that's ongoing work. The Uruguayan example shows why further development of co-innovation in Europe merits attention. They are very successful materially as well as in terms of organizing the networks. The context between Europe and Uruguay are very different, but some preliminary insights then. We see a difference where the researchers in our projects are usually at a distance from the farms or from the people on the ground actually doing the work. So is that positive, or should we move more to the Uruguayan conditions? The Uruguayans connected immediately to regional and national government after first successes, and therefore built then their network base. There is a difference in the publication rate, where publication rates in Uruguay are lower for scientists than in Europe, I think, but not the citation rate. So what about our own scientific systems, and are they conducive to doing this kind of work? And then I think that the success was very much nourished by this complex adaptive systems perspective, both at the farm level, but also at the project level. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. And let's now move to the next speaker in the program. I'll stop sharing in a minute and hand over to Dr. Stephen Leitheiser. Stephen works also at Wageningen University like I did. And he has a key role in the project in connecting the stories of the different innovation hubs as a social scientist, being the monitor in these check-in calls, being a key person in the organization of the co-innovation workshops, and also taking all of that to do scientific analyses. So very much an example to me, Stephen, of an engaged researcher. And let's now move to your part of the webinar.
All right. Thank you very much, Walter, for a nice, great presentation and a nice introduction. I hope everybody can't hear the hammering noises too badly in the background here. Unfortunately, there's some construction going on next door, so let's hope that doesn't interfere too much. And now I'll just share my screen here. So everybody now see the slides.
Yeah, that's perfect, Stephen.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, so as Walter mentioned, I'm involved in the work package that is focused on monitoring and evaluation. And this paper that I'm going to present is the product of these efforts over the past few years, participating in that monitoring and evaluation process. And this paper is one that's been done in concert with other colleagues in the project, also colleagues from innovation hubs that have participated in varying ways. And the overall aim of the paper is to foster critical thinking. So it's about learning about how we can improve in innovation hubs, but also as a project as a whole and in the future for other projects. So as Walter mentioned before, in Europe now, there's more focus on research, not as just a way to produce knowledge or generic knowledge about the world, but also to drive transformative change towards sustainability in the midst of many societal challenges. And one of the ways that's being done is in these mission-oriented projects like Agroecology-TRANSECT, where actors are brought together, multi-actors. So that's essentially what transdisciplinarity is integrating knowledge between these different actors and then applying it to solve particular problems and eventually, hopefully, leading to transformation, desirable transformation that helps us address some of these challenges. And so there's very much great expectations and great potential with these approaches. And with that, there's also great responsibility and need for reflexivity. So what we see in the literature, or what I've seen in the review of the literature, is that there's sometimes a tension or a disconnect between these ambitions and these great expectations and the actual outcomes. And Walter mentioned that's the reason for conducting this monitoring and evaluation and studying projects. And what we see sometimes is there's a tension between the proximate and direct impacts that we can observe in a short-term time frame of a project. So between direct action and the degree of transformative change. So how transformative are the actions? And I guess one reason for this is that for many actors, they're working within locked-in environments, we could say. So knowledge that is directly useful for them may imply that, some of the underlying causes or the more complex systemic or structural factors that are driving these societal challenges, that we kind of have to put those on the back burner in order to produce knowledge that is directly usable for them. So on the one hand, I would say this highlights the importance of monitoring and evaluation for learning. If we recognize that there's some of those tendencies that we're potentially reproducing problems that we intend to solve. And it also highlights the importance of critical perspective. And that we can understand as a sort of a critical social science approach, that we see problems aren't just always what we can observe on the surface or like the result of aggregate choices by individuals, but that they also can sometimes have underlying structural causes, market relations, class relations, and some of these wider things that enable or limit what people and institutions can do. So that means that we take things like systemic structural factors into account, and namely the power relations that those are shaped by. Yeah, and so for our evaluation, we were inspired by several authors, but this is a nice quote in particular that talks about the need to have this critical reflection on the political nature of transdisciplinary approaches. So in a mission-oriented project or a mission-oriented innovation system, there's many different directions that you can take. Agroecology, regenerative agriculture, there's many different approaches out there floating around, and picking which one you choose to amplify and work with is, for some authors, a political process that requires reflection, as we do in the project, and careful attention. Otherwise, it's said that some of these efforts might reinforce existing power dynamics and hinder transformation. So this is just recognizing that while there's a widespread recognition that we need to make some changes in the food system, the existing system is very profitable for certain actors. So to the extent that a transformation could create new winners and losers, we could expect certain actors to want to steer the direction of change to protect their interests. So it's taking some of these tensions around social change and resistance to it explicitly into account. So for our evaluation, we used two overarching research questions. The first question is, how and to what extent have the project ambitions that Walter went over in detail, how have these been realized? And within this, we broke it down into two questions. How and to what extent was actionable knowledge produced? And how and to what extent did this actionable knowledge contribute to agroecological transformation? And then we had a more general overarching question about future projects, but also what can we learn in Agroecology-TRANSECT for the rest of the project? How can we use some of this adaptive management of the co-innovation approach to make adjustments? And as I mentioned before, there was this need to take these political considerations into account, and defining transformative change or defining agroecology is something that comes up there as a need for this reflection, as there's many ideas about agroecology floating around. We decided in this paper to define transformative change or agroecological transformation in line with the political agroecology literature, where agroecology is not understood just as a set of farming practices, but a way of redesigning food systems more broadly. So we can think of it as sort of a social contract or a new social contract with food producers and also with nature. And it's also based on this concept of getting free of market dependency. So that is the idea that food systems are embedded in this market-driven structure that is currently prioritizing things like profit and production volume above other agroecological principles. And the harms caused by this focus are seen as externalities by the current system. So they're ignored from the cost of production. And if actors are internalizing those externalities, so they're taking in those costs, they might lose out in competition to others who don't. So this is basically just a recognition that agroecological transformation is not just about individuals playing the game better, so to speak, but it's also about challenging the rules or changing the rules, or even challenging or changing the game itself. So this is the scope of change that is implied by transformation. And we use this this sort of, I guess you could call it dichotomy or distinction, maybe is a better word. You could even see it as a spectrum between conformative change or conforming with the existing system or transforming it. So going on now to how we approach the evaluation. So the conceptual basis and methodology, we used an approach called critical realist evaluation. There we look at how did project interventions interact with existing contexts at 3 different contextual levels. and how did those interventions activate mechanisms, so yeah, triggers or causes of outcomes. That's a sort of a heuristic way to break it down and analyze this very complex reality that we have to study in the project. And these different contextual levels come into play in the explanation later. We have the social level that's touching on some of the things I mentioned earlier, things like political economy and distribution of resources and power in society, also culture, things like that. Then we have the more substructural level, you could say, a mediation between this wider social level and the personal level. That's organizations or these enduring institutions. You could see a project at that level, also universities that people work in, different companies. And then finally, we have the personal level, which is quite self-explanatory, I guess. That's more individual capacities and competences and the way that you choose to act within those other contextual levels. And for defining actionable knowledge, so we started with the definition that Walter had presented earlier about supporting the decision-making of actors with contextual knowledge. And we try to break that down a little bit to see what are we exactly looking for when we study these contexts and mechanisms and outcomes. And what we found in the literature review was that there was a few different types of actionable knowledge that are discussed. One of them, it's maybe more indirect. You don't necessarily associate it with action, but it's an indirect way of changing understandings, attitudes, framings, these kind of things that can down the road impact actions. Then we have instrumental, which is the more traditional way we might think of things. Its direct impact on a decision or on an action. And we also felt there was a category in the middle, some things that are somewhat conceptual, but also somewhat instrumental, and that's more changes to plans or strategies. And then we basically said, all right, these are outcomes of actionable knowledge production. How can those then contribute to agroecological transformation? So we didn't just assume that they could. We developed explanations in dialogue with different social theories about how actionable knowledge or knowledge contributions can actually be effective in driving transformative change in society. So learning is one way. That's more about preparing the terrain for transformative change and responding in new ways down the road. Especially understanding some of these contextual constraints and how to dodge them or challenge them. The conceptual instrumental is more about strategic reflection, so activating new strategies or simply becoming reflexive and conscious that you have a strategy and that it can be adjusted for potentially more effectiveness. And finally, what Walter discussed earlier, the anchoring. Anchoring is broken down into three different categories by Elzen and colleagues. We have the technological anchoring that's more like defining agroecological practices or sharing practical knowledge. Also network connections, forming new connections or alliances, and then finally, the institutional anchoring, which is changing the rules of that regime that Walter had shown before, or creating new rules or new points of connection with institutions. So those are the conceptual, that's the conceptual basis that we used for our analysis and evaluation. And in terms of the data that we used to make this evaluation and analysis, was done through participation and observation within these learning cycles. And we've now had several learning cycles that I've sat in on as a monitor. So hosting and participating in checking calls at co-innovation workshops and annual meetings. And there we took detailed notes and transcripts of some of the calls, and we did some coding there. And then we've produced analyses that we've presented to Innovation Hub facilitators to check and see if it sounds like it's describing their experience. So that's just a bit of background on the data analysis and collection. And now we'll move on to the results a bit here. So conceptual actionable knowledge, we can start with that outcome. The results, the more indirect cognitive changes that we discussed, this was an outcome for 9 out of the 11 innovation hubs. Several innovation hubs developed a deeper understanding, we could say, of agroecology. So going from an understanding of just agroecological practices as a sort of menu to be selected from in isolation to a more broad understanding, a more systemic approach. And this is a nice quote from the Hungarian Innovation Hub in their learning history, that it really evolved from this narrow perspective, just in ecological science, to the broader social, economic, and political dimensions, very much influenced by the project. Another conceptual outcome was the way people understood themselves in relation to their context. And an example of this from the French Innovation Hub. So one of the facilitators said that the project has opened some boxes or tapped into things where I, as a person, can learn from. Maybe I'll start the future project in another way. So it's here a bit non-specific, but definitely influencing the way that people are thinking and understanding themselves and the world. And to look at some of the mechanisms for this, so one of the key drivers was that it gave people space to step out of their daily grind. So people are very busy. They're tending to focus on what needs to be done today or tomorrow or next week. And we gave them not only this space, but facilitated discussions and exchanges to help them to think in a more zoomed out or longer term perspective, and to be exposed to other ways of thinking and questioning. And also the contextual analysis research that Walter mentioned, and by our colleague Pauline Cassard, was also seen by some innovation hubs to be an activating mechanism here. And when we look at the contributions to transformation, we can say there's maybe not measurable changes that we can observe, but we can expect that it increases the potential for people to contribute in a transformative way in the future. Moving on to the conceptual instrumental. So that's like semi-direct changes, you could say. We had different ways that people adjusted their strategy or made it explicit in the first place. So one example is the Hungarian Innovation Hub started to participate in policy briefs and to sort of influence or take on an advocacy role that they hadn't really seen as part of their responsibility in the past. And also just articulating the strategy in the first place. So the Dutch Innovation Hub, I'd never really thought about a theory of change or a strategy before, but now I think of myself as the gateway to the transition, and I want to keep it that way. And some of the mechanisms here, similar discussions, similar mechanisms to the first one, but also another key one was institutional support. So people having enough time in order to actually make these changes in plans, and not just continue this daily grind where they already have so much to do they can't even imagine another thing. And the way that this contributes to the transformation, reflecting on the strategy has the potential to enhance the effectiveness of action. And we can come back to this a bit later in the discussion maybe, but change in strategies tended to be more conforming. Instrumental actionable knowledge was an outcome for all innovation hubs, if we understand it as technological anchoring and sort of sharing practical knowledge about agroecological practices. So resources were a key thing here for the Swiss Innovation Hub and others. We also had institutional anchoring. Particularly strong example was the Dutch Innovation Hub including the strip cropping practice or getting it included in the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy eco schemes. This was influenced and supported very much by the project. Also, some of the work the Spanish Innovation Hub is doing to build a regional infrastructure for agroecology is being supported by the project. And yeah, for the Slovenian Innovation Hub, it's expanding their network just through being in the project. And interestingly here, the mechanisms were not so much related to knowledge per se that is produced by the project, but more ways that the project made existing knowledge more actionable. So that's through resources, but also just through legitimacy, association with the project, and institutional support was another big key here. And yeah, the contributions, the anchoring, we saw maybe a tendency towards conforming on that spectrum that I introduced earlier, with also some support for more transformative strategies. So a bit of a mixed bag and a bit of a complex need for context here. But yeah, just to introduce that dichotomy or that distinction for discussion and for learning from. So now to go on to conclusions and discussion of results. So we have support, more support probably for that first sub-question, that there's a lot of actionable knowledge production and showing the value that co-innovation governance and these reflexive learning cycles can have for a project. But at the same time, if we assess those contributions, or I'm sorry, the production of actionable knowledge, those outcomes, the contributions, if assessed on that political agroecology perspective, were not always tending towards the transformative side of things. And we can also say that there's room for more and better transdisciplinarity, both personally for scientists. So there, in some cases, scientists didn't have any experience with transdisciplinary work before, but they also were not feeling supported institutionally to take the time that it takes to engage in these complex processes and have different sort of outcomes than are expected by our institutions now. And Walter touched on that a bit earlier as well. And so going back to this tendency towards conforming here, the key factor, I would say, is social and institutional contexts and these constraints that limit the extent to which actors can actually act in more transformative ways, right? So in Denmark, we saw in the Innovation Hub many conceptual developments, including sort of those that were more aligned with political agroecology, recognition of how market dependency was driving some problems, but still they said, we're not a political party, we're not an interest group. We need to work within these dynamics to support the interests of our farmer customers within the current system. So it limited the amount of transformative change that could be accommodated. Another key point is that projects are they can play a very instrumental role in amplifying the agency of innovation hubs and other networks by providing resources and legitimacy. So again, this goes back to that initial discussion about the political role of transdisciplinary work and projects, and thinking about who to work with and in what capacity to work with them. And one more point about partner selection in projects. So maybe not only based on alignment of strategies and missions with project goals, but also on a more critical assessment of what are the possibilities of these actors to enact those transformative goals. What are the interests that they have to do so, and what are the motivations they have? So these are just some points to start the discussion. And yeah, I look forward to a good discussion at the end, and also to hearing from Vyara and Bertrand now.
Thanks, Stephen, for really interesting talk there. Unfortunately, due to technical problems, our time is super limited. So please keep any questions. We might try and answer some questions directly in the chat from the panelists if possible, and we'll have as much time at the end for those questions. But you heard Stephen talk a lot about the innovation hubs and how key they are to TRANSECT and to this way of working. We have Vyara Stefanova with us. She is she's an innovation hub facilitator in Bulgaria for our IH in Bulgaria. So I'll let her speak more about that. But I just wanted to put a question to you, Vyara, just to kind of bring this to life from an innovation hub kind of point of view. Could you talk us through some of your challenges and any sort of bright spots from this work?
Hello. As I was introduced already, I'm from Bulgaria, from the Society for Territorial and Environmental Prosperity, which works for the benefit of high nature value farmlands in Bulgaria. Having said this, you can understand that we are very much related to the existing agri-environment schemes in Bulgaria and agroecology and trying to support this. So when speaking of challenges within the framework of this project, our first and main challenge is that agroecology in Bulgaria is mainly understood as a set of existing agro-environmental agricultural practices, which already was said by Stephen and by Walter before, and not as a transformative process and approach that combines all the actors, science, traditional knowledge, social movements, to create sustainable and equitable food systems. So what we have tried and how we have tried to overcome this challenge is that we started talking to farmers and to the different stakeholders that what is this about, and to explain this transformative process, and the links that needs to be established at all levels, like local products, customers, communities, and the relation between them. But of course, it will take time, and it will not happen in the framework only in this project. We will have to work after it as well. Another existing challenge which we identified was that the knowledge system in Bulgaria are still fragmented. There was a very big period of time between 1990s and 2007 when the scientific institution, the extension services, and the farmers worked in isolation and worked with limited or no funds at all, which led to no translating the scientific knowledge into practical and field-level solutions. And although the situation improved in the recent years, there are still gaps which need to be overcome. And I can give direct example from our innovation hub. We took soil samples from the grasslands with the farmers which we worked for. We have the analysis of these samples, but then when we tried to find an expert that can give practical recommendations and solutions for those analyses for the nature grasslands or semi-natural grasslands, it turned out that the recommendation we received are somehow theoretical, and they can be applied only to the arable lands. They are not applicable to the farms and the grasslands which we worked for. So this is maybe because sometimes policy initiatives continue to favor conventional farming and conventional practice over the sustainable ones. So we still need they discourage the test experiments and the research which is in this field. And finally, about the challenges, so we are testing result-based agricultural practices and schemes in Bulgaria. And the challenge which we face there is that we found out that the data which exists in the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment, and upon which we would like to build our system and our support to the farmers to benefit the environment and the agroecology, that it is not reliable. There are substantial differences between the data existing and the real habitats and species which we found on the place. So we are now thinking how this can be improved and what actions should be done, not only at regional level, at the farm-specific level, but also at national level. And I'm not going to, we have a lot of challenges also, but let me say one bright spot which we are very much, how to say, very much proud of, is that when we created our Innovation Hub, it was back in 2014 when we started working with farmers in Western Staraplanina. We created the so-called partnership group. It was the beginning of the Innovation Hub. And within this partnership group, we tried to explain the farmers what we would like to do, but also to rely on their traditional knowledge and to help them solve their problems. So we gained their trust. So the bright spot for us is that our farmers, the farmers we worked with, they trust us and they are willing to participate in the projects which introduce these innovations and these transformative changes. So although we are working on a small scale, we are trying to show the policymakers and the decision makers their problems and to make the rules of the support and of the governing system applicable to the small-scale farmers. So this is what I can say in the limited time.
Thank you. And time is so limited, but maybe in a sentence, could you just tell us what you learned from the project in terms of producing actionable knowledge for transformative change? Is there one thing that stands out that you learned in a sentence?
One thing which we learned is that, first of all, the conceptual framework should be made clear in the beginning, but everyone within the project and even beyond the project have to understand that it takes time. It takes time to understand how you can use the tools in order to do the transformation. So I can give an example with the learning history. It's a very good tool, but at the beginning we were thinking why we should develop this, and then we understood that it actually helped us very much in the work with our farmers and our Innovation Hub.
Great. Yeah, and that's a theme I've heard from many others of our Innovation Hubs as well. Yeah, thank you, Vyara. Bertrand Dumont is the project coordinator for Agroecology-TRANSECT. So we thought, having heard from an Innovation Hub, we'd sort of zoom out a little bit and look at the overall project. And I'd ask Bertrand equally, what are your challenges from this, and what are your bright spots?
Thank you, Tim. So indeed, I have two caps. So I will try to take my cap of a project coordinator, but also member of the Innovation Hub. So for the first bright spot, I would like to highlight, maybe it's more my Innovation Hub cap that I will take. I would like to come back to this co-innovation workshop. We mentioned several that Stephen and Walter have mentioned. During 3 3 full days, we work in person and we interact with the other innovation hubs. And this was really a bright spot, because sometimes I'm working in grassland-based system in French uplands. So sometimes I worked with Vyara, who's also working on grassland-based systems. So we were working basically on the same system, but not in the same context. But so I learned about the difference between France and Bulgaria, what is relevant there, not relevant there, what can we learn from something quite related. But sometimes I also had to work with Maria, who's a facilitator of a Dutch innovation hub, working on strip cropping. And when I interacted with her, I have my own knowledge on grassland-based system, and of course, my thought, even if I try to answer, to think on her system, my thoughts are influenced by my own background. And her thoughts are influenced by her own background. And sometimes working with someone on a very different system leads to make you think out of the box, because something that was useful for useful and very common sense for her was not led me to think out of the box, because that was not in my reference scheme. So it's not only a think outside the daily grid, as mentioned by Stephen, sometimes it's also think outside the box by learning from someone who has the same question, but in another system. A second important point is that I'm a scientist with an analytical background. And Walter mentioned that as scientists, we aim for generic knowledge. And I'm indeed quite comfortable by also aiming for more locally relevant knowledge, also to be able to build success stories, also to learn from what does not work. But something I'm not comfortable in is when we don't have tools, methods, strong conceptual bases. And sometimes I engage in discussion with farmers. We had very nice discussion during meetings. And at the end, I thought, what can I catch from this? And the fact that in the Agroecology-TRANSECT project, we have very clear methods and conceptual bases that were presented today by Walter and Stephen, it really guides us. And sometimes it allows us to provide some quantification of process, because we identified key events, we identified a number of different activities, and at the end you can quantify things. And as a scientist, I'm not opposing quantitative and qualitative approach. I think that they are highly complementary. But I think that to convince scientists to engage in this type of research, I think they will feel more comfortable if we can quantify things to some level. And I think it's also useful to convince policymakers to come to some quantification. And then my third point, which was indeed a challenge, but that could become a bright spot, is related to attitude. We talked a lot about knowledge, and knowledge and attitude have been mentioned in some conceptual frameworks, highlighting, for instance, that as the result of experiential learning, participants undergo change in their knowledge, attitudes, skills, aspiration. This is the CASA framework. And when participants see benefits in these novelties, they will start adopting and adapting themselves and change their own practices. And what I learned, and I would like to relate attitude and skills, is I don't know if I became a better person by engaging in this type of research, but what I observed in the project and sometimes out of the project is that some researchers, I would say, do not have an adequate attitude. You know all people who are arrogant, who don't listen to their young colleagues, who sometimes during a conference adopt a very dominant body language. And what I observed is that they indeed lose the trust from those they aim to convince. And I'm not saying so that it's nice to be nice. It's a little bit more elaborated, but I'm more and more convinced that in this type of research, you need to be humble, you need to be careful with the others, you need to listen to the others. And these are becoming skills. This is part of a success, because if you don't change your attitude, I think you cannot be successful in transdisciplinary approach.
Thanks, Bertrand. And in one sentence, could you share sort of in terms of what you're learning for the end of the project and going forward?
For the end of a project, and as the coordinator, I think we collectively agreed that thinking on the legacy of a project is something that is very important. And it's important to think early in the project about the legacy, because if you want to do something, to bring something well organized, it should not be the last minute thoughts, oh, we've done brilliant things, and how can we organize these things in a good tool, or in a toolkit? You really have to think early on that during the project to be efficient on that. Really, legacy matters, but it takes time. We frequently mentioned during this discussion that being involved in this research, it can take time, but yes, building the legacy should be thought early in the project, and it takes time.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that as well, as we kind of think about the communication messages from the end of the project. The time is coming up to past, and when we were supposed to finish, and that's been really interesting presentations, and not loads of time for discussion. What I want to propose is, if I just do some closing things to think about, if the panelists and anyone wants to stay for 5 or 10 minutes, including the participants, there's a couple of very interesting questions in the chat, but equally, if people have to leave, they can leave. But before they do, I just wanted to thank all the participants and the speakers today. And again, apologize for the technical issues earlier. A survey's just gone live on Zoom, so if you could let us know, it really helps us to develop these webinars. If you could let us know what you liked about it and what was interesting and how we could do it differently. I also want to draw your attention to our next online event, which will be our virtual roadshow, taking some of what we've talked about today and linking that and making the bridge with policy and the policy landscape. So there will be a link going into the chat for that event, which will be the 20th of November. Tickets are free, and you can book them now on the Agroecology-TRANSECT website. We'd love to see you there to continue some discussion. That would be great. And if anyone is going to the Agroecology Europe Forum, I know Stephen is presenting some of his ideas from we've heard today to that event next week, and other colleagues from Agroecology-TRANSECT. So having said that, if anyone wants to stay around this, there's 2 questions in the chat. One from Martin, I guess aimed at Walter and Stephen, but the question is, with respect to the perceived need for food system transformation, and given the lopsided power relations existing within the current dominant food system, how do you navigate and negotiate the boundaries of your living labs and innovation hubs? i.e., other actors seem to be surplus to requirement in an envisaged future food system, for example, large-scale wholesale industry actors, middle people, that are maybe not required in the future envisaged system, that are maybe best excluded from the living lab or innovation hub process? Or are they useful as part of the transition, or could they hijack that process? I think it's a really interesting question, so I wanted to put it. I don't know whether Walter or Stephen wants to come back to that, or anyone else. Yeah. Who is invited along for the transformative and agroecological ride?
I could start, maybe Walter could jump in as well. Yeah, so I think I would say this necessitates at the beginning defining a clear strategy or transformation strategy or theory of change in which you address all these elements, and you define which actors then you're looking to amplify, as I mentioned earlier, and how you want to engage with different actors. So if you do invite people that are potentially having interests that are not aligned with agroecology, or that you perceive that way, then think about how you're interacting with those people and what are the actionable knowledge outcomes that you would target. So potentially, if people are in those environments, the knowledge you might target, I would say, would be more conceptual, to make them think about how and to what extent their approaches or interests are really aligned with the goals, for example. But if you wanted to have more tangible instrumental impact, like some of the impact we saw in Uruguay, maybe you think about different actors that would have more maneuver room, or room to wiggle and introduce some new approaches into their practices. So I think, a critical reflection about who to involve in defining clearly a theory of change with those elements included would be key here.
Thanks, Stephen. Walter, did you want to add anything?
Just from, let's say, the perspective of people wanting to build a consortium, it's so easy to just go to your, let's say, usual contacts and mobilize them to continue working. But if you really have not been working on transformative processes in agriculture or in other domains, unlearning is a very important component as well, where you say, well, okay, I have to unlearn to approach the same networks time and again, and how to exactly organize that is, for instance, part of a new institute around food system transitions that is founded in Uruguay, and where they have exactly this question: who to involve. And I think they start from these core discussions that Stephen mentioned, and then try and build stepping stones into a number of domains, in the policy domain, in the technology domain, but very much also in the grassroots organizations domain, which is usually ignored because it's so difficult for grassroots organizations to approach large donors through all the admin burdens, and also because they may have, rightly or not, suspicions about the way to which their ambitions and their visions are being transformed as part of being engaged with more, let's say, mainstream actors and including researchers. So trying to attempt to bring those grassroots initiatives into a project, I think, it's a huge opportunity, but also a challenge for research.
Thanks, Walter. There were some other questions. I see Walter's answered one or two in the chat already, and given the time, I think we should end it there. Just check there's no final thoughts from any of the panelists today before we close the session. No. Okay, so we will record. This session has been recorded, and any kind of technical glitches will be edited out and will be available on the website next week, and we'll send a link to anyone who's been signed up to it so you can share it far and wide. But I'd like to, finally, once again, thank everybody for coming. Thank you to our speakers who did a very good job. And we look forward to seeing you at our next online event on the 20th of November, should you wish. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.